First, we kick off this edition of The Lead on News 24 with the very latest. President Cyril Ramaphosa has put the police's chief financial officer, Puleng Dimpane, in charge of our men and women in blue as acting national commissioner. She's for now replacing top cop Fani Masemola, who's since been placed on precautionary suspension. That's because Masemola appeared in court earlier this week facing 4 charges in contravention of the Public Finance Management Act. That's the PFMA, all in connection with the now cancelled, controversial multi-million-rand SAPS health services tender, which was once upon a time awarded to the notorious alleged crime boss, Vusi Musi Kat Matlala. Hear from the president addressing the media a short while ago.
To ensure stability and continuity in the South African police force, I have appointed Lieutenant General Puleng Dimpane, who is standing right next to me here on the left-hand side, as the acting National Commissioner of Police. Lieutenant General Dimpane is currently the Divisional Commissioner for Financial Management Services of the South African Police Service and has a long and distinguished career both in the South African Police Service and in other public institutions and entities. Having been in the police service for close on to 2 decades, she has extensive experience in policing, in strategic management, in financial management, and in governance. Lieutenant Dimpane has a reputation for professionalism as well as for integrity. And what's more pleasing, she is one of the key women who are in the leadership of our police service.
This audio is courtesy of the SA Presidency YouTube page. Let's move on to our main feature. In a follow-on from Monday's edition of The Lead, a global Chinese construction giant and its staff overseeing a gargantuan wind and solar farm in the Karoo are now facing mounting allegations of not only breaches of health and safety regulations on site, but environmental violations and even sexual harassment. Specialist climate journalist Eugene van Diemen has spent many months investigating the tsunami of claims swirling around Sinohydro's oil hybrid energy project outside Sutherland in the Northern Cape. This is not a conversation to miss.
This is just from the different sources who didn't want to be quoted. Some of them still work on site, and others are just fearful in general. That they were overworked. Basically, they were told by Chinese supervisors that this is how the Chinese way do it. This is why your country isn't developed, because you don't want to work as many hours. You don't want to work double shifts. There's allegations that workers were fatigued and then operating forklifts and different heavy machinery while tired. They were asked to do random physical tasks, almost for humiliation.
Later in the show, on this day in South African history, the late former RVB leader Eugene Terreblanche was sentenced to hard prison time for trying to kill one of his workers. In Roby's Pointless Braai quiz for today, which country does the US Trump administration want subbed in to replace Iran at the upcoming FIFA World Cup? I can't believe this is even a question.
This is The Lead, and this is the South African story with your host, Graeme Raubenheimer.
Moving to our top story today, and joining me now in our Cape Town studios here on the foreshore to shed light on the details of his latest exclusive nogals for News 24 is the jet-setting Eugene van Diemen. He's our resident specialist climate journalist. He's also a pal. How's it going, Brie?
How's it going, Graeme? How are you doing?
Lekker, man. Can't complain. Look, we're going to get into all the details of this long-standing investigation that you've been, hacking away at for the longest time. But I thought, let's just quickly take stock. I don't know if you heard Monday's edition of The Lead. We heard about this multi-billion-rand Virginia solar farm outside Bloemfontein, about 2 hours drives away. We heard from our investigations colleague, Azara Karim. Numerous red flags in terms of the construction of this site. Some of the workers' visas have expired, alleged BBBE fronting, various health and safety regulations. Is this going to be a theme that we're going to be looking into for the longest time?
It seems that way, unfortunately. And this is really dispiriting, quite honestly. Like, these are projects that have great potential, and it's part of South Africa's just energy transition. You sort of hope for your clean energy and a clean process, and it seems like maybe that's not happening all the time.
And at the Virginia plant, Sinohydro is a subsidiary in the specific construction there, but it's not the main sort of state-owned Chinese construction company. But for our story today, Sinohydro is very much the focus, and I didn't know that they were so, global.
Yeah, they're major. This is a massive Chinese company. They do construction engineering contracts pretty much all over the world. Like, they are huge. They're massive.
Okay, let's set the scene
Sure.
here locally. Where is this Oya hybrid energy project situated? Do we know how much the value is in terms of the bid window and national government finally giving the green light?
Yeah, so it's located in Maatjiesfontein. It kind of straddles. It borders the Northern and Western Cape. It's in the Karoo. It's in a renewable energy development zone too. So it's quite remote, but it's quite beautiful also. And it was the project agreement, the then Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, as the department was then called, Graeme Raubenheimer, he signed in December 2023 two project agreements. One of them was with Oya Hybrid Energy for this project, and another one that's irrelevant to the story, but the total investment attracted for the two projects we know was 14.6 billion. There isn't an exact number for just Oya, but for between the two projects, of which Oya was the larger, was combined, a total investment was attracted was 14.6 billion.
And of course, we know in the South African scheme of things, these inflated figures, balloon over time because, parameters in construction projects seem to change almost all the time. Yep. And that's just, a general comment from my side. Okay, but it's a hybrid model, right? So it's wind and solar.
Oh, it's actually very fascinating. It's the largest hybrid energy facility on the African continent, as I understand it. So it's more than just wind and solar. It's wind, solar, and battery, right? So what they're doing is something really laudable. They're trying to solve the intermittency problem that is associated with renewables. It doesn't always blow. The wind doesn't always blow. The sun isn't always out. And so you aren't always able to generate electricity. But if you have battery storage on site, what that enables you to do is then ensure that you have readily dispatchable electricity available at a moment's notice when Eskom needs it, pretty much. So it's doing something very unique that other renewable energy projects aren't doing.
Yeah, and it's obviously something we need sorely within the South African context. I mean, yes, we heard from Eskom, just as a side note, yesterday. They say, hey, we're going to have our first, official winter load shedding free genuinely for the first time in nearly a decade. So the grid appears stable, but I mean, for energy security and moving away from, nuclear and coal-fired technology, I mean, this stuff is super critical, notwithstanding that it's supposed to obviously create jobs for the local community. How many houses or homes can it help power? And do you know what the total megawatts output is projected to be?
It's supposed to be 128 megawatts. So that supposedly would be around more than 240,000 households. That's how much it would supply the facility annually. And then they also talk about, in the marketing material, they talk about how much carbon dioxide emissions are avoided annually, and they say that's about 330,000, which is equivalent to 72,000 cars removed from the road annually.
Oh, okay.
In avoided emissions. So a really good project on the face of it. Doing a lot of the good things that we need. Big part of the just energy transition, and very innovative, and good to see this kind of project exist. But unfortunately,
There's issues that have propped up, right, which we've already alluded to. And they mirror a lot with the Virginia project to some extent. And we're going to reveal to you, lead listeners, over the next short while. And Ethan's expertly going to take us through some of the allegations and what he's been managed to find and get right of replies for. And in some instances, perhaps most, no right of replies. But let's start here. I mean, generally speaking, the construction parameters changed a lot here, right? In terms of what was set out in the plans and then what was sort of, alerted to later on.
Well, that's what some sources have said to me. I don't know if that's exactly the case. That's what. So this was part of the risk mitigation independent power producers program, right? The whole the idea behind the program is there's a short-term supply gap in electricity supply, and this is at the height of load shedding. And the idea was to get this out as soon as possible by the end of operational by 2025. This was in the context of really bad load shedding, and it just didn't happen. And so what very high-level sources told me and whistleblowers were essentially that it's a number of factors. It's beyond just design changes. It's just sloppy workmanship.
Yeah.
These are all allegations that other more qualified experts and authorities will have to engage and look into. But this is what they say. They were, for a number of reasons this got delayed, but Oya itself says that it was the late introduction of design changes on the transmission interconnection that has caused this delay.
Okay. All right. Now, with that out of the way, let's sort of hone into the main issues as per your latest report, which is on the front page of News 24. Still trending, still doing really, really well. A Chinese construction giant accused of abuses at Karoo solar project. So let's drill down, as we say. The very first big red flag sprang up nearly 2 years ago, and this was when Sinohydro's African environmental site manager resigned. Do we know why the reasons this particular person left the site?
Well, so there is an email that I've seen that specifically says he's resigning because of, and this is a quote, the continuous illegal activities of the Chinese.
Sure.
That's his words.
And this is somebody who heads up the African side of the actual Chinese company.
Sinohydro Power China's environmental site officer for this project, for the Oya hybrid energy project. So it's Sinohydro's environmental site manager, specifically delegated to do environmental site management.
Yeah, so that's an internal red flag.
Exactly. So this person didn't want to be interviewed and just referred me to Sinohydro for more information. But that was a red flag. And he was cautious about, or concerned about rather, an independent environmental consultant that was coming by, was going to be on site the Monday following the email that he sent, along with someone who I believe works with Engie, which is a French company and is part of the ownership structure. Engie is an equity partner, pardon me.
Right.
And so there were just concerns about things that were done on site that didn't accord with what was set out in the environmental authorization.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the first big red flags,
That's
right?
Yep.
Okay. When came then of severe breaches of, generally speaking, health and safety regulations on site? Can you give us some examples?
I guess it's debatable, but what people have told me is that this is just from the different sources who didn't want to be quoted. Some of them still work on site, and others are just fearful in general, that they were overworked, and that basically they were told by Chinese supervisors that this is how the Chinese way do it. This is why your country isn't developed, because you don't want to work as many hours, you don't want to work double shifts. So there's allegations that workers were fatigued and then operating forklifts and different heavy machinery while tired. They were asked to do random physical tasks, almost for humiliation, like lift up this giant rock and move it over there. That served no purpose.
Just because I say so.
Just because I say so. So it was a very strange, unsafe working environment. And then the quality of the roads. I mean, I went out there myself, and I can say for sure, like you seen people speed down there, and calling the road is actually being very generous. It certainly isn't safe by any means, and people have complained about it. So there were just numerous safety concerns that were brought to my attention.
Right. But I think at this point also to just let everybody know how much of the local staff actually on site is Chinese and how much is South African, just before we move on?
Yes. So Oya has told me that 99% of the workers on site are South African or local. And so obviously 1%, they say, is Chinese. There's a limited amount of Chinese people that are brought on site for particular specialist roles.
But therein lies the detail. They're the specialist guys, so they would be supervisors, people you can order others around. Right?
Exactly. Most of the time, the Chinese people were in a supervisory capacity. They were an authority. So they this just adds to the issues. You know, there was an air of authority that the Chinese people had there, and so when they would use that sort of very flippantly in ways that sources told me made a lot of people feel uncomfortable or unsafe.
Yeah, or generally undermined or whatever the case.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about the allegations of some of these Chinese workers not having the required documents or documents that allowed them to be there had, lapsed.
Yes.
What do we know as fact at this point?
Well, what we know as fact, based on very detailed immigration information, is that at least 15 of the Chinese staff started working with expired visas. We started, we came on the site.
Wow.
With the visas that were expired. Many others would also their visas expired. Some of them had the incorrect visa for what they were doing. Maybe they were there on a tourist visa instead of a work visa. So that was the main issue with the immigration. And so I can only definitively say, based on what I've seen, for about 15, but the allegations from different sources are that you've only gotten a snapshot of a moment in time. This has been a consistent problem.
Yeah, and Ethan told us, lead listeners, that before this chat got underway, I mean, he knows this for a definitive fact. He got sensitive documents that basically spells out all of this, right?
Yes.
Obviously from sources who are fearful of reprisal.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. This really is disgusting. This allegation from a local worker, a female staffer on site, alleges that one of the senior Chinese staffers was sexually harassing her. Is that right? What is the details here?
Yeah, so this is terrible, because what I started to hear is I spent a lot of the time in the different communities, Ceres and Touwsrivier, where a lot of the workers are drawn from, and something that I was told quite often is that so they would have these camps, accommodation camps for the Chinese. They actually lived separately from everyone else, and there were these rumors at first that the Chinese would come in and they'd have a lot of alcohol at their camps, and they would sort of look for women from the communities to come and entertain them, whatever that means. And I don't have any evidence for that to be shown to be true, but what I do know is that one of the workers there, she shared a story with me. She told me a really terrible story.
And she's using her name, right? And I think which is also really important.
She gave me permission to say name.
23?
Yes, Leandre. She's from Touwsrivier, and so what happened was her supervisor just would trail her all over the work site. He would follow her to the bathroom, to the toilets. He told her, allegedly told her, that she's not allowed to speak to other guys or other men, anyone else. And then one day, it was particularly hot. It gets very hot out there. They went. He told her to accompany him to get water at a site, and instead of going to somewhere close by, they went to the Chinese camp. And just for listeners to understand, the scale of the place, it's quite large and it's remote.
It's over 2 provinces. It's on the border of Western and Northern Cape, right?
You could drive for 10, 20, maybe 30 minutes from one site to another. And there's only like 1 or 2 roads, brand new roads essentially. What was once just pristine wilderness is now a dirt road. And she was told to go tag along with this Chinese supervisor. We know his name, but we haven't identified him yet because of the legal proceedings. And yeah, so along the way, he just started making allegedly feel very uncomfortable asking questions about things of a inappropriate nature particularly for a supervisor. And then they got to the camp, and he asked her to rest with him. He asked her to let's rest together. Which she understood to say, like, let's go to bed together.
Yeah.
That's how she interpreted it at the time. And
I mean, there's no other way to insinuate that.
Yeah. And then, so she said no. Obviously, they're like, we work together. What do you mean? What? And this is not going to happen. And she suggests that out of anger, he sprayed water at her, and she tried to find refuge with another woman that she just identified in the area at the camp. They eventually got back in the car, and then he continued. He tried allegedly to try to get something to happen, and he was like, "Hey, do you drink alcohol? Let's have some drinks together." And she said, "No, I'm breastfeeding." She'd recently had a child. I'm breastfeeding, and then he allegedly said, "Show me, prove it." Yeah.
She's later complained.
She has.
Is it with the authorities? Do you know
It's
if it's
with so she opened a case at the Ceres police station, and it's still under investigation.
Sure. And do we know if that senior Chinese staff is still in the country or not? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
No, that's a good question. So the what I've been told, and I haven't been able to establish personally, is that he's fled. He's gone to Zambia, is what I was told. He's literally fled because of this.
Sure. Okay. Well, no accountability. I think all of us are not surprised. But anyway. Okay, let's move on to some of the other issues as well. I mean, people have died in and around the site.
Yes.
I think to be very factual here.
Yes.
There was first this incident with a digger on site. What happened there?
Yeah, so there was a truck that... so unfortunately, the contractor that was involved in this hasn't yet responded to my requests, despite me asking multiple times. So I don't have a full formal response from them. But what I was told by people that were on site was essentially it tipped over and rolled down an embankment or a hill, and the driver passed away.
Sure.
So that was, and there's some allegations that this was because of fatigue. We don't know that for sure, but this is what people that work on the site have told me.
And then there's this very serious accident that often happens on rural roads, in the deeper stretches of farmland, Western Cape, or anywhere in South Africa, where often people on the back of a bakkie, maybe the bakkie hits a pothole. People are flung from the vehicle. They sadly die. What happened in this accident? 7 workers lost their lives. Is that right? 7
workers and several others were injured. So this is obviously a tragedy. There's 7 lives lost, and these are dirt roads, right? They kick up so much dust, and when I went out there, I would see taxis are speeding down there, and I went out there on a 4x4, and I didn't feel comfortable going faster than like 60, but yet it happens. So I mean, the road quality itself is under question. The different roads. Some of the local farmers that I spent time with, they had serious complaints about sort of heavy machinery and large construction vehicles degrading the roads even further, and just making a road that is really ill suited for transporting people in any safe way.
Yeah, and obviously impacting people who live around there, etc., etc.
Yes.
Before we get to the final right of replies, Sinohydro a little bit abroad. track record talk, and then we can sort of wrap up. Something that wasn't necessarily overtly included in your reporting is that you spent a lot of time with the local community, going to meetings in regards to what is supposed to be a massive employment opportunity for an area that relies mostly on subsistence farming, commercial farming, that sort of area. I used to cover like the farm worker strikes there in 2012 in the area, and it's poor areas that the DORP style soil is still used on farms. That's the sort of situation we're dealing with. And obviously, we don't need to talk about the high unemployment rate in South Africa today. Yeah. People look to these big projects for a leg up to put food on the table. What did you uncover in your discussions?
I think this is a key point, Graeme. I think you've highlighted something really important here. So I didn't add this in the story because so many people there. They would have these community meetings at a church. I went to the library, and there was a community center, and I spoke to many people. And they're quite terrified, quite frankly, of speaking to journalists and being on the record. But it's a tight-knit, it's a small community, Tosrefir in particular. Sort of what starts out as an anecdote with one person, they share it and then they confirm and amongst one another. And they would all tell me that a consistent theme was that they feel that they aren't benefiting from this. They feel that it was pitched to them with the idea that they would benefit, that the community would benefit, would be uplifted, that there'd be employment. But instead they feel that it's benefited to the select part of the community. And everyone else feels that they've been negatively impacted, whether it's by increased traffic or the allegations of the harassment and of, just they feel disrespected, I think, which is really sad. And they just don't feel like they've benefited. I think that's the main takeaway that I took from this, was that they all were so hopeful and they feel that it's not worked out for them at all. They haven't seen any benefit. They haven't seen this turn into jobs for them. They haven't seen it in improved access to services or anything.
Yeah, to upgrade the rest of the area,
exactly.
Right? And to my mind, Marikana comes to mind again. Different context, but, a mining community that's not benefiting the locals in terms of infrastructure and opportunity, et cetera, and that's such a good case study example. Sinohydro, let's give right of reply. What did they actually respond on, if anything?
Well, so they did. I put all the allegations to them, and they didn't respond with any great specificity to specific questions that I put to them. They did respond and say that if I had to summarize what they said, it's like we follow all relevant laws, rules, prescripts.
Yeah, the usual PR
exactly.
Copy paste.
That's essentially what it was. They didn't directly address any of the allegations of harassment or workplace safety issues. It was just that we follow South African law and relevant processes. Essentially, that's what it was.
Sure. Okay. All right. But Sinohydro abroad, I think, has also its own track record. I mean, there's this issue with the Ecuadorian government.
That's right.
And many other countries that it's had an influence on, either positively or negatively, most of which appears within the reporting of how we understand this context of the story to be a bit of a negative track record.
Unfortunately, it seems that way. So the former Ecuadorian president is on trial because there are some allegations that he received or accepted millions of dollars in bribes a decade ago to ensure that Sinohydro received lucrative government contracts.
Sure.
And then also there was an investigation conducted by the African Development Bank Group's Office of Integrity and Anti-Corruption, which established that Sinohydro engaged in a fraudulent practice in bidding for work contracts by misrepresenting its prior project experience.
Sure.
There are other things. I think there was an issue with the European Investment Bank and Sinohydro in 2023. They reached a settlement regarding misconduct related to projects that were financed by the European Investment Bank. And Sinohydro agreed to a voluntary contribution of 1 million euros to fund integrity, environmental, and or sustainability projects. So,
Okay, let's sort of end here. And it brings me to my final question. How long does it take for a big investigation like this for Ethan to undertake?
Well, this has taken quite a while, to be honest. I think it's been more than a year, just because I'm not on the investigations team, so I don't do this every day. But it's also just because I wanted to make sure I've got everything right. So it's been over a year.
Yeah, sure. It's not the end of the story?
I don't think so. So this is just what I could prove definitively. There are some other allegations, perhaps even of a political nature.
Which you cannot ventilate
which I can't,
on this very podcast.
I can't say anything about that now. And surprisingly, since the story's come out, maybe not surprisingly, some people have reached out via News 24's tips line.
And that's the same thing that happened with Virginia, if I may just add, with the Virginia story in Azara.
Great. And if anyone listening to this has more information, I'm happy to get that. Yeah, so it does seem like there is some more there. And I have been told about some other things that I just haven't gotten into yet. There's just too much to cover all at once. It's already a long story.
Yeah. And perhaps, apologies, really final question. From a climate perspective, this is supposed to be something that we can all champion and enjoy as South Africans. And I feel it's been soured. The chalice has been poisoned.
I think that is the biggest issue for me personally, and I as the climate reporter at News 24, I think that is the issue, right? We've going through this process called the just energy transition, and I think South Africa is the most dependent on coal for our energy, like on the planet.
I think Germany rivals us a little bit, but not quite there.
We're like 80% of our electricity comes from coal.
Sure.
So like we are heavily dependent on it. And so that affects everything, not just the immediate pollution and climate change, but also just the competitiveness of our economy as the rest of the world starts to impose taxes on pollution or imports and things like that. And so we're doing this to also introduce new technologies and add, reduce the carbon intensity of the economy in a nutshell. And when you have stories like this, it's unfortunate, to put it mildly, because you sort of, as you say, you soil it, you besmirch this really hopeful project, and you risk replicating the same issues that are associated with some of our major fossil fuel infrastructure projects, right? Corruption and impropriety of different types. And we're doing something new. The just energy transition is something new. We're building new capacity with new energy technologies and sources, but we risk making the same mistakes if people aren't benefiting.
The human errors.
The human errors and all of that. And that's why I did the story. I think that's...
As a climate journalist, you could have gone in and just been like, hey, this is going to boost us for solar and, wind technology, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And look what you uncovered in the process.
Unfortunately, it would have been nice if it was just hey, this is a great project. But it is. But how it's done matters.
As the cool kids like to say these days, as I rub my hands, Ethan's just cooking, baby. He's cooking right now. This is just the start. Look out for him. He's our specialist climate journalist here at News 24. He's tasked with looking at these things specifically. I'm sure there's more on the way.
There is.
Bye, Dankie.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Graeme.
And finally...
Ending off now with On This Day in South African History, it's courtesy the SA History online database. Well, the late former RVB leader, Eugene Terreblanche, was sentenced to hard prison time for trying to kill one of his black workers on this day, the 23rd of April, 1997. A Potchefstroom court handed him 6 years for attacking farm worker Paul Machabi and causing him severe brain damage. Terreblanche had also been found guilty of assault for setting his dog on a petrol attendant. The courts also barred Terreblanche, the right-wing extremist, from owning a firearm due to his predisposition to violence. Though, in the end, he only served 3 years behind bars before gaining parole in 2004 after exhausting all of his appeals. 6 years later, after claiming to be a born-again Christian, Terreblanche was murdered on his Ventersdorp farm in a heated dispute over unpaid wages. His farm worker, Chris Maslangu, was sentenced to life in prison for murder. In Roby's Pointless Braai quiz today, which country does the US Trump administration want subbed in to replace Iran at the upcoming FIFA World Cup? I can't believe this is even a question. It's Italy. Yet the four-time Missouri World Cup winners failed to qualify for the tournament, with the Iran embassy in Rome calling the US morally bankrupt. It's been reported this overture from a Trump envoy is all to try and mend diplomatic ties between the US and Italy. That's after Trump himself criticized US-born Pope Leo XIV over his reaction to the Iran war, in which he called Trump's actions, quote-unquote, atrocious. What the hell did I just tell you? What a story that is indeed. Damn, 2026? It's still early. Chill out. If this was your answer all along, congratulations. Well, you scored that priceless prize of being the most informed person around the Braai Place, and I'll see you around that Braai Place this weekend. The lead's only going to be back with you from next week, Wednesday. Of course, Monday's a public holiday, as the 27th of April is Freedom Day, commemorating our very first diplomatic elections held on that day in 1994. The lead will be back with you by Wednesday at 7 p.m. and then get another edition of the lead on Thursday at 7 p.m. as well. Until then, whatever you do this weekend, don't do it too hard. Relax, chill out. Hopefully it rains. You can get nice and cozy up in your home. Look after yourself, don't drink and drive, and until then, I hope you've enjoyed listening. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll have the lead on News 24.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast channels.